The harbour is a very busy place. Most engines come to the harbour to collect freight trains and take them to their destinations. Some far, others not. The harbour is a very busy place. Most engines come to the harbour to collect goods trains and take them to their destinations. Some far, others not. That day, Diesel was working at the harbour. He was shunting cars into place. He was shunting trucks into place. Thing was, engines came and went, but Diesel practically ran the harbour by himself. Later, Sir Topham Hatt came up to Diesel, but Diesel looked exhausted. Later, the Fat Controller came up to Diesel, but Diesel looked exhausted. As the passengers exited the coaches, Sir Topham Hatt arrived. As the passengers exited the coaches, the Fat Controller arrived, and Thomas steamed away towards the harbour. Thomas arrived in no time and began to work, but Diesel was watching from a distance, whispered Diesel as he rowed away. Diesel didn't like doing work around the harbour. He'd much rather be like the bigger engines, pulling long trains to Vickerstown and beyond. But Sir Topham Hatt had ordered him to work at the harbour for the next couple weeks. But the Fat Controller had ordered him to work at the harbour for the next couple weeks. As Thomas was resting in a siding, Diesel soon oiled up next to him. Thomas said as he steamed away, and left a furious Diesel speechless. But Diesel had other plans. For the next couple of hours, Thomas worked hour upon hour, each car into place and every train left on time. For the next couple of hours, Thomas worked hour upon hour, each truck into place and every train left on time. Soon, Thomas needed a break and went to get some water. But when Thomas left, Diesel slid in. Diesel began moving the freight cars around, shuffling them into the wrong lanes just before the engines' arrivals. Diesel began moving the goods trucks around, shuffling them into the wrong places just before the engines' arrivals. Soon, James and Henry came to pick up their trains. They both coupled up and set off, but they didn't realize that the trains were swapped. Diesel watched from a distance. Thomas soon arrived back at the harbour, but Diesel soon arrived with Sir Topham Hatt on board. But Diesel soon arrived with the Fat Controller on board, said Thomas, and he set off. But later that day, Sir Topham Hatt did receive complaints, and they weren't pleasant. But later that day, the Fat Controller did receive complaints, and they weren't pleasant. At the Farquhar sheds, Thomas was resting when Percy puffed in. Said Percy, as Thomas steamed away to deliver the mail. Said Percy, as Thomas steamed away to deliver the post. In the morning, Sir Topham Hatt arrived to give more orders to Thomas. In the morning, the Fat Controller arrived to give more orders to Thomas. Thomas smiled as he puffed away. When he arrived, Diesel was waiting for him. Thomas ignored and steamed past him and got to work. Thomas worked extra hard that day, almost as much as Gordon on 3 express runs. Even the foolish freight cars behaved better than usual. Even the troublesome trucks behaved better than usual. However, when he wasn't looking, Diesel mixed up the trains once more, but this time Sir Topham Hatt was watching from a distance. But he didn't speak to him right away. He just waited and waited. However, when he wasn't looking, Diesel mixed up the trains once more, but this time the Fat Controller was watching from a distance. But he didn't speak to him right away. He just waited and waited. Thomas backed up into the exit of the harbour where Sir Topham Hatt was waiting. Thomas backed up into the exit of the harbour where the Fat Controller was waiting. He said as he steamed away, but Diesel backed up laughing. However, he didn't expect Sir Topham Hatt to be watching him severely. However, he didn't expect the Fat Controller to be watching him severely. He told the devious Diesel. He replied sadly. But as he departed from the harbour, he stopped. He didn't think of it as a punishment. He saw it as a special. He said as he laughed and went away. The next morning, Thomas was in control of his branch line once more. He said, as he got ready for the first train of the day, once more on his own branch line.